It's January 31st, 2011. 39-year-old Nicole Moore is enjoying her day at the beach. She's on vacation in Cancun with friends from her exercise group from back home in Orangeville, Ontario, and nothing is better than the tropical weather for these fitness-loving people. After an intense game of volleyball on the beach, Nicole's friends decide to head back to the hotel for some lunch, but she tells them to go ahead without her. She'd much rather take a little swim to refresh her spirit and wash the stubborn, soft sand off her skin. She doesn't know it yet, but this choice is going to change her life forever, put her beliefs to test, and terrify anyone who hears this story. Cancun is one of Mexico's most popular resort areas, and for good reason. Located on the Caribbean Sea, the city teems with life. Hotels, nightclubs, and malls coexist with colorful open-air markets and family restaurants, but nothing quite compares with the white, cool sand beaches. Nicole Moore had no reason to be tense as she entered the water that afternoon. If anything, she was happy about her vacation, her body buzzing with the memory of the recently ended volleyball match. Nicole didn't even swim that far from the shore. In fact, she was in waist-deep water, trying to scrub off some of the sand that got stuck to her body during the match. She had no idea her movements were stirring up something from underneath the waves. She also had no idea that 2 sharks had been spotted at a nearby resort and that employees on jet skis had managed to get only one of the creatures to steer away from the tourists. So when Nicole looked up from the water, she saw 2 people on jet skis. The woman naturally assumed they were other carefree beach enthusiasts. They were waving their arms and talking to her in Spanish from afar. She had no idea what they were saying and just assumed they were being friendly. Nicole smiled and waved back at the 2 people and then went back to enjoying her little swim. But then those 2 yelled again, and Nicole had the sinking feeling something was about to go terribly wrong. Then something cold and slimy bumped into her body, and the 39-year-old was gripped by true dread. For a split second, she dared hope it was just a little kid who was snorkeling and who she simply hadn't seen. Then realization. Horrible realization. The massive mouth opened and clamped down on her left thigh. The teeth were so sharp it was like they were tearing through butter. Nicole looked down and saw the water instantly turn red with her own blood. It was strange. She couldn't feel the pain, but the gruesome sight was enough to tell the woman she was in deep trouble. Adrenaline causes a profound physical response, due to which endorphins that act like natural painkillers are released. So it's quite natural that Nicole didn't feel the extent of her injuries, even though the barbed teeth tore through the flesh down to the bone and ripped out 2 of her quadriceps and 2 hamstrings. The shark's bite yanked away more than a foot of Nicole's skin and flesh. The woman was desperate to get out of the water. Her mind was filled with images of her young daughters Tia and Ella. They were only 6 and 7 years old, too young to experience the trauma of losing their mother. Nicole Moore chose to fight. Her left leg was rendered useless by the horrible bite. She couldn't move it at all, nor stand on it, so she had to make good use of her arms. The mother of 2 started using her arms to propel herself to shore, but the movements were imprecise and slowed down by her wounded leg's inertia. Nicole struggled to advance through the bloody waves. In the meantime, the fearsome shark was circling her, leaving no room for interpretation. It wanted a second taste. The beast lunged in an instant, clenching Nicole's left arm in its jaws. The needle-like teeth held tight. The shark had the woman's entire arm locked in its mouth. Nicole felt an incredible amount of pressure as the shark tried to pull her underwater. But seeing those teeth layered and serrated gave the woman another wave of strength. She chose to defy fear and maybe death and raised her right hand. She started hitting the creature erratically until she somehow managed to smash her open hand down on the shark's nose. That one punch saved her. Although it's widely agreed that the shark's most sensitive areas are its eyes and its gills, a well-placed hit on a shark's nose could potentially make the animal let go. And that's how this particular shark reacted. It let go of Nicole's badly wounded left arm and swam away. But the horror was far from being over for the woman. She now had to somehow get herself to the shore, despite the huge amount of blood she'd lost and the dreadful injuries both her upper and lower limbs had suffered. Her left arm was hanging precariously. Her left leg had a gaping hole in it and was essentially incapable of motion. You didn't have to be an expert to realize the situation was dire, but Nicole was, in fact, a nurse, and she knew her wounds were serious enough to be considered potentially fatal. She felt fainter by the second, and there was a great risk of her losing consciousness and simply drowning after putting up the fight of her life. But as it happens, Nicole wasn't entirely alone. In the end, it was humankind's innate desire to help another person in need that helped her. One of the people that had previously tried to alert her about the approaching shark rushed to her aid before she could disappear beneath the still bloodied waves. The man grabbed Nicole's right arm, gunning the jet ski and towing the woman to the shore. A trail of crimson blood was left in the water. Being back on the shore came as a small relief to Nicole. She was feeling weaker and weaker. People gathered around her. She could hear panicked voices talking in Spanish and English, but nothing was more present than her own thoughts. As a nurse, she had to do what she knew best. She took medical inventory of herself and finally asked the surrounding crowd for help. She couldn't go just yet. She had a loving husband and 2 amazing children, and she wasn't the kind of person who gave up easily, although it was getting harder to breathe. As a medical professional, the woman understood that losing so much blood caused respiratory distress, and every time her heart beat, blood squirted into the air. By the time Nicole arrived at the hospital, she had lost 60% of her blood. Her vital organs were shutting down, and she had lost consciousness. She was rushed into an 8-hour operation in a desperate attempt to save her life. The medical team had to insert a central line directly into the woman's heart and pump unit after unit of blood to make sure it didn't stop working. When Nicole woke up in the hospital, her father Alberto and her husband Jay were there. Even more, someone had found the missing piece of her left leg and brought it to the hospital, where it was reattached. But her suffering was far from its end. 6 days after the attack, Nicole was flown from Mexico to Toronto. Her father and her husband had struggled to find a hospital bed back home in Canada, but they finally managed to find a team who wanted to see Nicole through her ordeal. The new doctors were astonished to find teeth marks on Nicole's bones. But what really got them was that the woman's previous operations had been done carelessly. There was decay in her flesh, seawater and sand mixed with the bandaging. Her thigh had been reattached incorrectly. It wasn't getting any blood, so it was rotting away little by little. Multiple tissue transplants were required in order to cover Nicole's bone in flesh again, and her arm ultimately had to be amputated. But the attack never broke Nicole's spirit. She decided to stay and fight for her life and children. She overcame every obstacle, every bout of pain. She chose not to hate the shark. After all, it was her who had been trespassing in its natural habitat. Although shark attacks are incredibly rare in Cancun, in fact, there had been only 40 shark attacks in the whole of Mexico in the past 450 years. 11 months after her accident, Nicole returned to Cancun and even swam in the same waters in which she had nearly met her end. She has since become a motivational speaker, a shark conservationist, and a Shark Week beloved guest.